March 2020. The world had just stopped. Not paused, not taking a breather, just full on face planted into the pavement, like a drunk uncle at Thanksgiving. Complete silence where rush hour traffic used to be. Empty grocery store shelves. That eerie, apocalyptic quiet that made even extroverts question their life choices. Or start baking sourdough bread like it was a religious cult. And most of us were trapped in our own heads and our own homes, scrolling through feeds of people pretending that everything was normal, while slowly losing their minds behind closed doors. And we were all slightly feral, desperate for human connection, clinging to anything that felt like community. And I found my way onto this bizarre app called Clubhouse. Think of it as a live radio show, but hosted from someone's kitchen or bathroom. Conversations that felt like eavesdropping on some of the most interesting table at the restaurant, except everyone was in pajamas and secretly grateful for any excuse to talk to another human being. And for photographers like me, starved for any sort of human connection, creative connection, during endless lockdowns, it became our virtual bar, our conference, our workshop, our group therapy session, backyard barbecue, all wrapped up into one glorious dysfunctional mess. And so here I am in this photography room one evening, surrounded by 12 brilliant, seasoned commercial photographers, the kind of people whose work I'd been drooling over for years, whose careers I'd quietly envied. These were the guys who had photographed everything from US presidents, global Nike campaigns, every Academy Award winner from the past 20 years. And meanwhile, I was the lead photographer at Taylor Guitars, living what should have been a dream job, but quietly suffocating under the weight of endless product shoots and brand guidelines. The conversation was flowing, portfolio critiques, creative process, the usual kind of shop talk. When someone asked about my portfolio range, I mentioned and referenced Jeff Lipsky, a photographer I genuinely admired. And Jeff seemingly balanced intimate celebrity portraits from magazines like Vanity Fair and high-end commercial campaigns for companies like Eddie Bauer, Chase, MasterCard, a true master of versatility without compromise. And please hear me on this. I was not comparing our talent levels. I was simply pointing out how diverse work could maintain a visual DNA, how his voice carried through genres. That was something that I was trying to figure out how to do for myself. And this voice came out of nowhere. This photographer, I guess, whom I never talked to and no one knew, jumped in, said this.
The fact that you would compare your terrible work to Jeff Lipsky is truly laughable.
The words hung in digital air like smoke from a cigarette that no one wanted to claim. Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that makes you actually aware of your heartbeat and suddenly questioning every creative decision that you've ever made. Now, hear me that I could have fired back. I could have gotten defensive, defending my own work, my intention, my right to dream bigger than my current skill level. Or I could have sulked or thrown my phone against the wall. Instead, I started laughing. And I'm not talking about a polite chuckle that you give when somebody tells a mediocre joke, but a more unhinged cackle that happens when someone says something ridiculous, but maybe could be possibly true. Because if I'm being brutally honest, part of me knew that he wasn't entirely wrong. My name is Patrick Four, and this is episode 1 of The Terrible Photographer. It's a podcast for working photographers and creative humans who are just done. Done with fake positivity, done with algorithm chasing advice disguised as inspiration, done with pretending that a new preset pack or mirrorless upgrade is going to heal that deep existential ache of not knowing if your work is actually good or actually matters. And this show is not a tutorial. There are no lighting diagrams. There are no branding funnels. It's just a messy, honest, and occasional unhinged side of making art while trying to pay rent and not losing your mind or your soul in the process. We will talk about burnout, about self-doubt, and about why that camera that you've been eyeing for the past 6 months probably will not save your career or your sanity or even your portfolio. With that said, welcome to episode 1. I'm calling it, You're Not Terrible, You're Just Early. So here's what that stranger didn't know. I was slowly suffocating in my corporate photography job at the same time, shooting the same product shots every single week, watching my creative soul get strangled by brand guidelines and revision rounds that turned every image into committee-approved beige. The work paid okay. It looked impressive in presentations, but left me wondering if I had peaked creatively before I had even figured out what I wanted to say. The truth is, I was bored with my work, burned out from my job, and desperately searching for any sign about where to take my career. In that brutal Clubhouse moment, it cracked something open that had been sealed shut for months. Oh, and the plot twist that made me laugh even harder, that brutal critic turned out to be a 22-year-old photography student from Los Angeles whose biggest credit was probably shooting his girlfriend's Etsy jewelry. But the kid wasn't entirely wrong. My work wasn't honest. It was safe. It was technically proficient, but probably forgettable. It looked like someone who knew what they were doing, but felt like someone who was still pretending. And that comment was the match that lit something that I didn't even know was waiting to burn. A week later, I created this exclusive invite-only group called Terrible Photographers. And what started out as a sarcastic middle finger to the photography elite became something unexpectedly vulnerable and valuable. A sanctuary for creatives who wanted to experiment without ego, who didn't need to impress anyone, who could admit their own failures without shame. We shared fears, disasters, ideas, and discovered something rare in the image-obsessed industry: permission to suck spectacularly without having to pretend it was intentional. I'm a photographer, a commercial photographer, who shoots brands, I shoot portraits, campaigns, and someone who spends an embarrassingly amount of time questioning whether I'm actually making what matters. And some days I feel quietly confident about my work. Other days I feel really confident about my work. While other days I feel like I'm only one critique away from applying for a job at Starbucks. See, you want to shoot for clients and still sound like yourself. You want to get paid without selling out. That's the tension. That's the show. Because here's what nobody prepares you for. The creative journey isn't a straight line from beginning to master. It's a series of peaks and valleys that will test your sanity and your commitment. I want to spend a few minutes talking about confidence and why it's probably gonna try to kill your creativity. So I love motorcycles. I love everything about them. I love their sculptural beauty, the addictive pull of acceleration, the smell of mountain air rushing past you as you carve through the Southern California roads. They're truly and genuinely dangerous in ways that make skydiving look like a knitting circle. So according to research, Writers are nearly 4 times more likely to crash in their first month than their entire second year. And that initial period is terrifying because everything feels foreign. Your reflexes are untested. Your muscle memory doesn't exist. And you're still figuring out basic motorcycle operations. But survive that baptism by fire, and this different, more insidious danger emerges. False confidence. Around 3 to 6 months, fear begins evaporating. Speed transforms from terrifying to exhilarating. Corners start begging to be taken faster. You think, stupidly, I've got this figured out. The problem, you absolutely fucking don't. Your confidence has outpaced your competence. You have created a dangerous gap where overreach meets inadequate skill. One unexpected patch of gravel, one distracted driver, and suddenly you're sliding across the pavement, wondering how everything went sideways so quickly. And I've encountered countless photographers trapped in this same perilous zone where swagger vastly exceeds ability. This perfectly illustrates what psychologists call the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with limited knowledge dramatically overestimate their abilities. It's commonly called Mount Stupid. It's the treacherous peak where your ego writes checks that your skill set can't cash. And it's that kind of Top Gun energy where you think you're Maverick, but you're really just one bad choice away from flaming out spectacularly. You want to know the telltale signs? People jump straight into charging clients with their Costco camera special, armed with caffeine, a misplaced confidence, and YouTube certification in crushing it. They dish out unsolicited critique. Their own Instagram resembles a graveyard of over-sharpened disasters. They can't handle feedback. They obsess over gear specs, always talking about the next lens, while not really understanding how to use their current lens. And they're drowning weak images in post-processing filters. Listen, we've all lived on Mount Stupid. I know I have. I've critiqued photographers way beyond my league. I've looked at legendary work and thought, yeah, I could do that. I've been the overconfident idiot, drinking too much of my own ego and calling it craft. But the opposite extreme is what I call the valley of despair. And that's where you land when your taste develops faster than your ability, making every shot feel like a bitter disappointment. And most photographers cycle between these extremes like emotional ping pong balls. The secret isn't avoiding these places. It's moving through them with self-awareness and grim determination. But here's what I've learned about building a real confidence. It comes from 2 sources that really can't be faked. First, you gotta master your tools. You cannot create exceptional work while you're fighting your equipment. And this doesn't mean owning the most expensive camera. It's about achieving fluency with whatever you have until it becomes an extension of your creative vision. Second, put in the hours and do the work. And there's no shortcut here. Confidence comes from repetition, from shoots that don't go according to plan, from learning to troubleshoot when everything is falling apart. Every frame you capture is either a victory worth celebrating or a lesson worth learning. And those accumulated lessons create the foundation for unshakable confidence. You know what else I've learned? That studying the masters and ignoring everyone else is the best approach. If you want to excel at portrait photography, don't study your competition. Immerse yourself in photographers like Annie Leibovitz, Richard Avedon, and others. Study them like you're preparing for a PhD defense. Spend days in libraries with dusty photography books. Take notes on lighting techniques, compositional choices. Hunt down interviews where these legends discuss their process and their failures and their breakthroughs. Be humble enough to swim as a small fish among giants. Better than flexing in a pond full of tadpoles thinking you're Jaws. If you stay in their waters long enough, studying their movements, learning their patterns, you might discover something powerful staring back at you in the mirror. Not a copy of them, but a version of yourself that's been elevated by proximity to greatness. And the tension that you're feeling between what you want to say and what you know how to do, that's not a problem to solve. That's where the good shit lives. That's where your voice starts to emerge. So, over the coming episodes, we're going to dig deep into this journey. We'll explore the psychology behind creative growth, why overconfidence gets you in trouble, how to navigate the valley of despair without losing your mind, and what it actually takes to build lasting creative confidence. We'll talk about the difference between learning from the masters versus learning from peers, and we'll examine when gear becomes a creative crutch versus a creative tool. We'll explore the phases that every photographer goes through and how to recognize where you are on that journey. We'll discuss why terrible might be the most important phase of your creative development and why the greatest photographers all started somewhere embarrassingly mediocre. But here's the truth that kid on Clubhouse handed me. You can't become great without first embracing that you're terrible. Not the kind of terrible that comes from copying somebody else's work, but the good kind. The kind that shows up when you're trying to say something real. Something that doesn't have a reference point. And what you're calling terrible might just be the first time your work isn't trying to impress anyone. It's not trying to chase trends or play it safe. It's just you trying to communicate something deeper, something more meaningful, something more honest. Every week, I'll try to give you something that pushes us to keep growing, to keep learning, to keep doing things that are slightly out of our comfort zone. So here's your challenge for this week. I want you to make something that you're not so sure about. Not something that you know will perform. Not something that you know your clients will like. Not something that you know other photographers will like. I want you to make something that's unfinished, too personal, a little uncomfortable. And I want you to sit with it and ask yourself, what am I actually trying to say with this? You don't have to post it. You don't even have to show it to anyone, but I want you to make it because that's the muscle that you need to build. The willingness to be terrible in service of something true. And that comment on Clubhouse from that 22-year-old photographer in Los Angeles, that kid thought he was cutting me down. Turns out he was handing me a match. The burn became a spark, and the fire has not gone out since. Your journey starts now. Messy, imperfect, uncomfortable, and exactly as it should be. Thank you for showing up. I'll see you next week. Until then, keep making things that matter. And if this episode hits somewhere between doubt and inspiration, I ask that you subscribe, maybe share it. Send it to a fellow photographer, creative, who's out there trying to figure this shit out too. Listen, we're just getting started, and I'm really glad that you found us. Stay courageous, stay curious, and yeah, stay terrible.